Hi, this is Bobby Cobb, and I want to welcome you to this edition of the Presence Posse podcast. Today, we're going to be covering the subject of embodying the power of presence. And joining with me on the podcast today is Danielle McMahon. She is a horse whisperer and a people whisperer and a teacher of presence. We also have Dr. Fred Blum, a former chiropractic, still a chiropractic, I guess, just no longer practicing, and a self-inquiry coach and a brilliant teacher of the power of presence as well. And what I'd like to do to begin with, if we
What about you, Bobby?
Yeah, introduce yourself.
This is my first time moderating, if you can't tell. My name is Bobby Cobb. I'm a liberation hypnotherapist and a mindfulness coach. And so what I'd like to do is for each of us, and I will make sure that I take my turn this time around, and just go into a little bit more in depth about a little bit about the work that you do and initial thoughts that you may have on the subject of embodying the power of presence. Danielle, could we start with you?
You can. I'm going to plug my earphones in, though, because I think my sound will be better.
All right. Sound pretty good right now, but better is better.
Because you're breaking up, and I don't know whether it's you or it's me.
Loud and clear.
Good. Okay. So, embodying the power of presence. There was a part one, and evidently I was confused about the part one and thought it was last week's thing, but it was July 12th. So I have had to try to reframe myself real quick here about what I'm talking about. And as far as the work that I do, what I'm largely doing at this point is teaching personal peace, emotional mastery, and being those foundational pieces to be able to be present. So that's where I am in the process of that. And as far as embodying the power of presence, I feel like that we got to a point in the first one where we needed to address some of those emotional challenges that we face in being able to do that. So that's where I think we'll move on from here.
It definitely is going to be a subject that we talk about for sure. Fred, how about you? When you think of embodying the power of presence, what do you think about, and a little bit more about what you do? I gave you just a little snippet there. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure, I could probably answer both questions together. Embodiment. This idea of embodiment is like it's taking something that's sort of like etheric or conceptual and sort of making it real. So it's the difference between, like that old joke, the little boy says, how you doing, Grandpa? And Grandpa says, I'm fine. And the little boy says, well, why don't you tell your face that? You never heard that?
No.
Yeah, because that's embodiment, because the child just naturally understands embodiment, like, if you're happy, you're going to show it. You're going to embody that happiness, and so that's where I think in a lot of personal spiritual development or personal growth or whatever you want to call it, where the rubber meets the road. Mm-hmm. It's not just here. Another joke comes to mind, actually. This is one of my favorites, where the man gets into an argument with his wife. And so he immediately goes into his meditation room, and he's got an altar, and just like for the next 30 minutes, he is just at peace with the universe.
Listen out.
And then he opens the door to his meditation room, and she's still there. Like, can you actually bring that peace from your meditation cushion into the world. That's what I mean by embodiment, at least to me. So, as far as like about me, what I do is I help people to find that peace, that freedom, that well-being, that happiness inside themselves, so that it shines through what I would call their ego or their personality more and more readily. So we live life as an expression of that peace and freedom and happiness, as an embodied expression of that, as opposed to it being just an idea or a concept that we read in a book somewhere. Hopefully that makes sense.
That makes total sense. And I like that it's a little bit different from the take that Danielle's got on it. And that tells me that we're going to have a nice wide-ranging conversation here this afternoon or this morning in Alaska, I guess, depending on where you are in the world. And I have a little bit of a different take as well. One of the philosophies of the mindfulness coaching work that I do is the gap between the way life is unfolding and the way that we wish it was unfolding is the delta that many, many negative emotions exist if they are related to mental time traveling, either running out into the future and oftentimes either spinning out in your mind a best case or a worst case scenario, which could happen, fun to do, useful for planning. But if you're spending all of your time there, you're definitely not embodying presence. And the opposite of that is also true. If you're spending all of the time in the past, relitigating, wishing your childhood had been different, wish that the company hadn't have screwed you out of a great opportunity, and you're still reliving those emotions each and every day, then we're in a situation where, again, we're being pulled via the time traveling away from the present moment. So in my work, one of the things that I do is suggest to people the emotions that you are experiencing are not telling one, as we've been conditioned to believe about our life's circumstances. If you see somebody who's really up and ask them, hey, what's going on? They may say, oh, I just found the love of my life, or I got a great new job, or a new car, or my jerk boss got fired, and nothing but blue skies and sunshine moving forward. And if they're awful and you say, man, you look off, what's going on? And could be, my wife is leaving me, or my company is getting shut down. I just got a negative letter from the IRS. And as we continue, that can be one of the subjects that we explore, is what are our emotions actually communicating to us? And I'm going to suggest that it's guidance and it's reminders. And in some cases, it's kind of rumble strips on the highway to remind you that, you may be slipping off into the past or into the future. Danielle, you had an interesting little phrase there, and it has escaped me, but the peaceful presence or something like that.
Personal peace is what I'm coaching,
peace.
And I just have offered a course in that for the first time, so I'm kind of excited about that. But my premise in that is that no greater peace is possible unless we learn to experience peace personally. Because we all have heard the phrase that hurting people hurt people, right? So do inspired people inspire people? I think they do. So I feel like that's where I can start to impact the world in a way that I want to impact the world, in the way that I want to be present. But I really like what Dr. Fred said too about the way we say it in the recovery program is, if your program is not working at home, it's not working. right? It can work in the rooms of recovery, but if you can't take it out of the rooms of recovery and have it work in your home, it's not working. It's the same sort of thing. And I'm a very pragmatic kind of practical person. So the ethereal stuff is difficult for me to grasp unless I experience it. And so that's what I feel like people have to get to be able to embody presence. You have to have a moment where you experience it, where you experience personal peace, to be able to have any ability to help somebody else experience it.
So for somebody who's hearing that and is thinking, man, that just sounds amazing, that's exactly what I want, what would be some guidelines that you might share with them to really begin to embody their personal peace?
Well, for me, and I mentioned that in recovery from addiction, that was the first place where I became a student of life. And the first thing that I learned as a student right there was that I had no emotional skills. What had happened, the way that I understand it now, and maybe I don't, another thing we say is what we know is always subject to revision. Everything I know is subject to revision. But I was traumatized when I was very young. I had no memory of that until I'd been in therapy for a couple of years, and it was safe, evidently, for that memory to come up then. And when that started to come up, then I could start to uncap my emotions. Like I had just shut them down. I was just okay all the time. But that was the truth as I knew it, but it wasn't the truth. Like I have a full range of emotions just like everybody else, except
Yeah.
I just didn't express them. Instead, I developed an addiction so that I didn't have to, and I could be okay all the time, which didn't work at all. That's not a really what's the word? A very good adaptation.
Yeah.
So that's why I focus on emotions first. That I feel like we have very little coaching, education, helpful knowledge that's being expressed about how to deal with our emotions. And once you find out that they are just energy and motion, and if you actually don't resist them, they're only going to last for a little while. And if you don't retell that story, that something horrible that happened to yourself, it only happened the once, right?
Yeah.
If you don't keep telling the story, it's done. So there are so many easy steps to take towards emotional health that we're just not taught. And just because they're easy doesn't mean, just because they're simple doesn't mean they're easy to walk through, but they are. You can survive emotions. It's just, that's where I started. So that's where I would start with someone else. If they don't have those issues, there's more, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like that's almost always how addictions beginning. They start as a coping mechanism, and in the beginning, they're oftentimes quite useful. But then, if it's the only game you got going, then one of the places that trouble goes. And your keeping it alive thing. I was doing a hypnotherapy session with a Marine, and we were working on PTSD. And out of nowhere, just like divine intervention or a flash of insider intuition, I said to him, what you're trying to get over is over. The only reason that it's still alive is you have it on life support. And at the moment that I said that, I didn't really think that I had said anything. It wasn't like, "Ooh, this is good. I need to write this down and remember it." But following up with him on his next session, that was one of those little small hinges that swing really big doors. And he said, "Man, that just landed for me so deeply in my heart." And it was almost as though it released all this pressure that I'd been holding inside myself. So now that is more frequently a regular part of the process. How about you, Fred? What comes up for you with the stuff that Danielle says, or if you want to change the subject, feel free.
No, I like this subject.
Okay, me too.
Yeah. The term that comes to my mind is identification or identifying,
Mm.
and that's a tricky one for us because we tend to somehow have this belief that our experiences are us, like they
Mm.
define us. And that's the fundamental. Anybody who's seen me on any of these presence posse events before, like the fundamental thing that I talk about is the distinction between the ego or this identity that we create, and we create that identity very, very young out of fear and insecurity, because like a baby is born into this world like just completely open, and by the time the baby, it's like most of us have forgotten just how sensitive and like that baby is, and so the baby gets bombarded in a way that it can't cope with it from that state of openness. So we create an identity that sort of filters our experience through this idea of who we are. But anyway, the point is the distinction between that and this idea of who we really are, that I would call our true self or true nature. And that confusion, meaning we forget that we created this identity or personality and we mistake it for who we are. That's the part of us that takes on these experiences as though they are who we are, as is part of us. That's what I mean by identifying. So, from the perspective of my ego, if you say something that I don't agree with, I might take it personally.
Mm.
I might take it as a personal attack. Heck, we see that happening in the world all over the place right now. Um, but from the perspective of my truth, of who I really am, I just hear that that's just one more. You have a different experience of life than I do. And it doesn't really mean anything. So PTSD is a great example of that. I could see that something happened to me, but it's not that happened, it's not who I am. It's just an experience that I had. Now, from the perspective of embodiment, which I think is really important, we know that that experience can also get wired into the system a little bit, into the neurology or into the tissues. So sometimes it takes a little bit of time or work to unwind that from the body. But I think the first step is, like you were saying, Bobby, just to recognize that it's not currently happening, that it's not happening
Yeah.
in real time.
Yeah, Danielle, I remember seeing a post that you did. I think it was late last week, or maybe it was promoting this. I'm not sure, but about holding our emotions in our body and kind of storing them and creating this weird little, what Eckhart Tolle calls a pain body, uh, and holding it in there. And I know part of your work is to help release that. So, would you mind kind of piggybacking on what Fred introduced there and tell us a little bit more about that piece that you talked about in the very beginning?
So I'm not sure what post you're referring to, but I do know that when you don't let emotions move, if they're energy in motion and you don't allow that motion, if you don't allow the movement, they get stored in your body. They get stored, as Fred said, in your neural pathways, or I don't know all the science of it. I just know that when you don't have a healthy emotional being, that you're not going to have a healthy physical being or mental being, or this essence, right? I'm not sure. One of the questions that I put on for today was, can that be measured? Can you measure that? And I was hoping that our neural person and our heart math people would be here to help me with this. Can you measure coherence? Can you measure how much that you're able to flow energy through your body and not have these blocks in your tissues, in your thinking patterns, I don't know whether it can be measured. That's why I asked the question, and I don't know whether you guys can answer that or not, but I feel like that with the work that the Heart Math Institute has done, there has to be some ability to measure that. Is there a way that we can help somebody assess where they are there, other than just the visceral experience of it? I know that as I have traveled this path, whatever you want to call it, spiritual awakening, personal development, all the things, right? That many of us that want to be better humans are trying to figure out at this point in time, that those would have been helpful in some way. I can get reflections from other people that I have changed, that I am better, that I actually know that my face is informed more often than it used to be. Like, I was happy with my family and my home and my life, and people didn't know it. I forgot to act like that, right? It just didn't come through. So I know that that's better now than it was, but I don't have any measurement of it. It's just my experience of it.
Well, let's turn it back to our resident medical professional, Dr. Fred. Any thoughts on that, on measuring the coherence and measuring the stores of, I think you worked a lot with that in your chiropractic practice, right?
In a way, yeah. I mean, well, first of all, it's definitely measurable. And there is, technology that exists now that can measure it, meaning, anything from, EKG, EEG brainwave type of stuff to heart rate variability, which is one of the main things that Heart Math uses. So it's definitely measurable now. And even if the technology didn't or doesn't yet exist, it would still be measurable in many cases. It just wouldn't be something we knew how to measure. But there's, it's like, as a human being, we have the ability to measure things in our own way. I forget those amazing statistics, like, the human eye can perceive like 1 photon or something difference in light, or, like, we're incredibly skilled at making these measurements. Maybe we don't quantify them, but just like the kid can see that, grandpa's not happy, we are able to sense that in ourselves and other people with a very high degree of accuracy if we're out of our own way. Once we start getting into the thinking and the assessing and the doubting and all that stuff, we can confuse it pretty quickly. But the clearer we are, like when Bobby says that phrase to ask his client just drops into his mind, that's an example of just being that space where whatever it is we need to know in the moment, it just becomes available. We don't have to figure our life out in advance. Right. I had a mentor a number of years ago named Steve Chandler, who he was a coach also and a trainer, mm-hmm. and he had a very wealthy CEO type come to him, and he's like, this kind of almost like cartoonish version of a CEO. You're like, I'm he says, I'm hiring a coach. You're my last interview. Let's see how this goes. And he handed Steve this notebook. He said, this is my 5-year plan. Tell me what you think of it. And he hands Steve this document. It's like 40 pages long, in like full color with charts and graphs and the whole thing. And it's like defining this guy's life for the next 5 years, like when he's going to go to the bathroom, just
step by step. Everything's scheduled out.
Exactly. Now, probably most of the coaches that this guy handed that book to were like, oh yeah, this is perfect. And we're going to come up with an accountability plan and blah, 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 blah. And Steve, if you know Steve, he's very low key, almost deadpan in his humor. And Steve looked at this, got a very deep voice, and he flips through it for a minute, hands it back to the guy, and he says, frankly, this is the most fear-based thing I've ever seen in my life.
That's a pretty good pattern interrupt.
Yeah, that was a pretty good interrupt. And, by the way, he ended up getting the job. But the point he was making was that, like, look, I'm not saying you shouldn't make plans. That's not the point. But like, leave a little space in those plans for the magic to come up, for the inspiration to show up, the things that you can't easily measure and you can't predict, but that are really where, like, in my experience, the real brilliance and the genius of life can come through, is when we're not trying to control it so much.
Yeah. Release and allow it to happen without, always trying to bend the world to your will. Right. And going from there. I did a leadership training with one of the top 5 banks. I'm signed an NDA, so I'm not going to name the company, but I was working with 36 of their senior executives in their wealth management division. And I went through an initial round of interviews, and almost all of them, of the 36, were, many had to be rescheduled 2 or 3 times because something had popped up, which is fine, that happens. And, often they were running late, and, they saw me just kind of as one more thing in their day. And they're like, sorry, I'm running late, but I got a hard stop at the top of the hour. And so what do you got for me? And so we'd have the conversation that we had and then move on. And there were 3 or 4 of them that were a little bit more relaxed and a little bit more present. And when I had my first debrief with all of those folks' boss, he's like, what do you think? And I said, I think your people are scheduled within an inch of their life. They don't have any time to think. They don't have any time to react, because they're so much looking at their watch and keeping on task again. And he's like, all right, well, I'll give them an order to, make sure that they make plenty of time for you and keep their time and all of that. And I'm like, no. Don't do that. And there were, I was working with all of them, and I worked with them both in groups and individually. And, the 5 or 6, I don't remember exactly, that were a little bit more relaxed. I said, got debriefed on those guys. They were all good people, and they were all top performers, not too surprisingly. And I said, I'm going to continue to work with everybody, but I'm going to give those guys a little bit of an extra attention. And they were the ones before my first in-person meeting that were already starting to show results. And they would get on conference calls where I wasn't there, and they'd be like, man, Cobber is he's really onto something here. This is great ideas. And the other 30 or so are like, what? I feel like the time I'm spending with them is a waste. And things started to soften a little bit. And I was coaching them to coach their financial advisors. And at the end of that particular program, there's a magazine that ranks, the top 100 in the industry. And of the top 25, 12 were managed by my clients. I never met any of them. I didn't have anything to do with their success, but that was the first time one firm had dominated just a little bit shy of having half of the people in the top 25. And it was all about creating space, as you said, Fred, to allow things to happen, to be able to unfold. There's a phrase, I think it might be the Navy SEALs, that slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Mm-hmm. And, there was a little bit of that feel that was unfolding in there.
Yeah, I love that term, unfoldment. There are different levels that, like, people go through, in their own development, and to be able to, just to be fair, like we're not telling everyone that's the way you should live right now, because
right.
To live in that place of unfoldment, to really just trust how things are turning out, and it takes a certain degree of what should we say, work or something, in order to be able to really let go into that. So it's if somebody's like really feels like they need to control their life, hearing that, it might sound like, we're crazy, basically, or it might seem like some pie in the sky, but isn't really practical for the real world. So I think it's really important that people, it's like self-awareness here. You notice, how much do I feel like I need to control this situation? You really have to, like Bobby, you said, slow down so that you could begin to notice this, back to embodiment. When I'm engaging in my day, when I'm exerting whatever degree of control I think that I need to exert, how does it feel to me? Like, how much tension does that create in me, either mentally or physically, that I can notice?
Or emotionally, even.
Yeah, exactly. And my suggestion would be that if you're noticing that much tension in you, then probably there's room to begin to reassess how you're working in the world. If where you're at generally feels pretty good, then maybe it's working for you right now, whatever level of it you're at. But if it feels tense, that's a pretty good sign that you're probably, you need to look at this a little more closely.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was talking about earlier with the emotions and the tension and the pains that we have in our body can serve as rumble strips. You guys know that term, right?
Yeah.
We have them up here because we've got a lot of dangerous highways. So it's real important that, if you start to veer a little bit, everything's weaving through mountains. And so if you get a little bit out of your lane, your car ride gets uncomfortable very, very quickly and very, very vigorously. And, if you were asleep, it would wake you up. Yeah. And, looking at some of those things and just trying to pull on that thread a little bit and just wonder what the heck is going on here. Why is this occurring?
I'm just noticing that Miriam and Jan have been asking some great questions.
Maybe shoot.
We could, they write in the comment section there to the right is where I'm seeing them. Yeah, I'm happy to read them if you don't see them.
Yeah, go right ahead. Thank you.
Sure. So Miriam's got a question, and why don't maybe Jan could take a shot at this. Miriam says, what about gratitude, love, and other regenerative feelings? When is it appropriate to focus on them and not use them as avoidance tactics, which is a really important point that she mentioned earlier, too, in a comment. Jan, you want to take a shot at that?
Well, I'm Danielle, but I will.
Danielle, sorry. Maybe Danielle would like to take a shot at that.
So when all of my emotions were shut down, And it seemed like the first ones to come up were not the happy ones, right? They were the ones that I had been overwhelmed by and had shut down because I didn't know what to do with them. So as I got able to move through an emotion, then I was able to have a larger range of emotion, and then I could begin to understand that maybe it was worth doing, because when you have those regenerative feelings, you do feel better physically and you think more clearly, and you're not living in that tension of having to control your emotion, your schedule, your whatever. It's control is an illusion. Really, I mean, that's somebody mentioned that. Oh, you did, Dr. Blum, that it was a fear-based schedule, right? So if you're living in that emotion as your basis for how you're going to proceed with life, that's a totally different feeling than living in the emotion of trust, living in the emotion of gratitude. Gratitude, I think, can be pretty easily used as a bypass. You've got to move through forgiveness, in my opinion, for gratitude to have true power. Like, you have to forgive yourself. You have to forgive life. You have to forgive whoever you feel like victimized you. You have to take yourself out of the drama triangle to pursue peace. And that's where those regenerative emotions are appropriate, and that will help you. What is it you really want? How do you really want to feel as you move through this experience of life? And that's where the focus becomes fun. And yeah.
So I think part of Jan's question, at least the way that I heard it, was when is it good to focus on those and enjoy them and use them as a signal? And I'm paraphrasing you, Jan, I'm sorry. And when are we worried that we might just be using that as a a bypass to, stuff down what it is that we're feeling. And then, all of a sudden say, I am grateful, or I am happy, or I am joyful, when, you're really not. And in that particular moment. So I'd be curious as to both of y'all's takes on that. Y'all.
That's why I did hear Danielle say that you don't want to get like her perspective is if you go to gratitude too quickly, you could be bypassing or that kind of thing. I get that. It's funny because again, it depends on one's perspective. The more that we begin to operate from our true self, as opposed to this ego or identity, as I mentioned before, the more that gratitude, love, these regenerative feelings that Miriam mentions they're just there. They're not something that I need to practice.
Right.
They're just the natural experience of life is one of love. And I'm not saying it can grow or shrink in any moment, but it's always there in the background. For all of us. I'm not just saying for any one person, for all of us. That's the truth. We just don't see it all the time, which is a big part of this journey, is just seeing the love that is already there. But with that said, I think it's valuable to take time, to like actively experience these things, because they do feed us. Like I love that word regenerative, that they do build something in us that allows us to reach those states more and more effortlessly over time, because they literally, when we practice those things, they build those pathways in the brain. So I think it's always a good idea to explore those states even when they're not naturally arising.
Yeah, I love that idea that they're always there. Sometimes they're behind the veil. You guys both know that I had to put my dog down a couple of weeks ago, and that was a horrible experience. I literally cried for days, and the smallest little thing could trigger me to cry again. But even in all of that profound sadness that I was experiencing for that time, there were moments, I was grateful that she had such a wonderful life. I was grateful that I had found a veterinarian that does house calls, and that I did not have to take her, in her final days to a vet's office. I was glad that we could do it there. And I was grateful that she could pass away in my arms. And I was grateful that the doctor was so kind, but those were just like little blips on the radar. It was like the little radar ping from the submarine. It's like, bing, you're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. And, then I would be back for, 2 or 3 hours of just bawling my eyes out, getting rid of cleansing tears. And in a way, I wasn't trying to avoid that at all. I knew it was coming. It hit me a whole lot harder than I thought it was going to. But in a weird way, the sadness felt good. It felt good to have loved another sentient being so profoundly that it was that hard to get over. And it was cool that and I wasn't looking for doing an exercise. What am I grateful for? They showed up, and I appreciated them when they did. And then they disappeared for several hours and popped back up again. And ultimately it started to expand.
I'm just thinking about those really intense emotions, like, real grief or sorrow. And, back to embodiment. When we're really just having the experience, like when you describe, I'm bawling my eyes out. If you don't think so much during that time, and tell me if this was true for you.
It was. I know where you're going. Yeah.
Just being in the experience of it without resistance. That's kind of the key.
Yeah.
It's really not so bad, is it? It's just something that's happening, and it's very intense and full and embodied. But I mean, those experiences that I've had, not the sad thing that caused it, like a dog or a parent passing or something, but the just those moments when I'm so fully present in my grief, I wouldn't trade that experience for anything. It's not something that I like can't wait till it's over. In that
Right.
moment, if I'm fully present, there is nowhere else to be.
Mm.
I like that a lot. Any thoughts on that, Danielle?
Yeah, it's interesting. I describe my initial experience of personal peace, which presence and personal peace to me are very similar. It's the letting go of what lies behind and letting go of your control of what's coming, and being right here present and experiencing joy, because it is sort of that natural state. Was when I was 6 years old and somebody put me on a horse. That was my experience. It was also when my father passed, and he was on hospice, and I was there to help care for him for 2 or 3 weeks of that journey, and felt that profound privilege in being there to support him in his journey, and felt all of those things just, go through and be there with my experience, with his experience, doing what could be done, and having the reactions that I had, that I realized that I had the ability to maintain my personal peace in a very challenging emotional situation.
Mhm.
So it was that experience. It was an experience of grief to let me know that I had actually learned to take care of me, to be able to hold space for somebody else and still make myself a priority in that, so that I ate well through it, and I slept when I could, and I felt my emotions, and I drank lots of water. That was key.
And this is all at 6, or did I
No,
miss it?
no, that happened just
Much later. Okay, got it.
3 years ago.
I was going to say you're like the golden child.
No,
I
no.
mean,
The
yes,
6-year-old was riding a horse and having
Okay,
a
got it.
joyful experience. And I was, it was 3 years ago when that experience happened. And that's when I was like, oh, I don't have forever. And oh, I can teach this. And oh, this is actually what I want to do. So this is what we're doing now. Before that, for most of my life, I worked very physically hard as a horseshoer. I did some horse whispering and training and teaching lessons, but the bulk of my work was putting shoes on their feet.
Wow. That's very cool.
So yeah, I think either extreme, like, can bring you to the point of understanding presence. Like nothing else matters except
Right.
this moment.
Yeah.
Could I add something to that real quick?
Please do. Absolutely.
Because it's funny, like we're talking about death a lot here, but that seems to be one of those experiences that kind of really can pull us into the present. And I'm not, maybe we at some deep level, sense our own mortality, or I don't know what it is. But I'm reminded, my dad passed just about 6 years ago now. And I remember because I was, at the time, I live here in Austin, Texas, but I was traveling back and forth to New York every month to see clients. And so I got to see my parents. I was there every month for 5 years. And I remember because I had just returned to Texas when I got the call. Now, a little bit about my dad. My dad was, let's just say it this way, like in my 50 odd years of knowing him, the words, "I love you," never left his lips. Okay. Like not one time. He had a lot of other words that left his mouth, but not those. And unintentionally, somewhat unconsciously, that led me to have a certain idea about who he was, and a certain degree of resentment, even though I didn't walk around like, oh, my dad, and like we got along fine and everything, but there was a certain story like, well, he could have been nicer, or something like that. but so here's what the point is. So I get this news that he passed, and I went through whatever I had to go through, like just with the shock of hearing that and all that kind of thing. And within a relatively short time, I found myself up at my computer writing something, which later became his eulogy, although that wasn't the intention. And the realization, and when it hit me, it was like the clouds opening and seeing the sun for the first time, was that, and the way I wrote it in the eulogy was being grateful to my father for teaching me how to love without words.
Mm.
In other
Wow.
words, even though he never said it, none of us doubted that he did. None of us
Wow.
ever questioned it. And it was like one of those moments again, like where getting out of my head for a moment, getting out of the stories that I had about him allowed me to see him. Now you could say, oh, what a tragedy that I don't see it till after he's gone, but that's not up to me. You know, you see it when you do.
Yeah.
And I'm very grateful to even see it now and to even feel moved by it now as I share it. But yeah, it was like this idea that we think we see someone because we're so in our heads. We're not embodied. We're not, it's like if we stop and we slow down and we really see each other, there's so much more there than what the story that we make up about them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the story that we make up about it is not the truth. That's
No.
the story.
It's more about us than them.
Yeah. Was there any sense that when you had that, after he passed away, that realization as you were writing down what became the eulogy, was there any sense of regret, or was it just kind of feel like a aha moment that, oh man?
There wasn't, and I don't know, maybe I was in denial or whatever, but it doesn't, I mean, here we are, it's about 6 years, and I still don't think, I don't tend to do regret. I just don't think it's a super useful emotion or a state, whatever you want to call it. I think that I honestly believe that we're all doing the best that we can do given the current perspective we have, and you can't change that perspective until you do. Even if I said, Bobby, Danielle, whatever, look at it this way, until you can like process that information, it's not valuable, and it's not going to change anything. My son has been big, like overweight for most of his life. And I've talked to him about it. We've tried to, encourage him to eat healthy or whatever. I had a friend who's like, you gotta, because now he's just turning 18. I said, my friend said to me, you gotta do something, because if you don't change this, his whole life is going to go in this direction and it's going to be so hard for him later. And there's a part of me, I'm like, I get it, John, I understand. And there's a part of me that just says, people don't change until they do. There's like something in us that changes when we're ready to make the change. And damned if in about a month or 5 or 6 weeks ago, he just decided, I'm going to start going to the gym. And he hasn't missed a day at the gym in well over a month. And he's changing his diet. He's losing weight. His body's changing. And it happened inside him. Mm-hmm. And people change when they're ready to change. We can create the space for them to change. But all that harping and nagging and all that stuff, I don't think had any effect.
Yeah. And in fact, from a hypnotherapy point of view, one of the things that we've noticed is if you're in an interpersonal relationship, what is the natural reaction? If you were like just on your son every day and whipping him and say, get to the gym, or, you're not going to get this, that, or the other thing. Is that going to open his heart and open it to the process? Yeah. Or is he going to push back, or will he do it just to get you off of his back? Whereas when you are being with him the way that you were, and, gently offering, as I'm sure you do, some suggestions that, hey, you might really want to think about this. And if you need any help, I'm here to help you. Then suddenly when that light finally goes on in his heart, you got the commitment for every day for 6 weeks in a row. And, by now, I wouldn't be at all surprised if, he's created a very positive association with that, because he's feeling better, he's feeling thinner. When we work with smokers, that their body begins to change dramatically on day 3 or 4. It's easier to breathe, they're coughing less, and they're breathing more easily. And that becomes like their new addiction. The health becomes their new addiction.
Boy, it's that day 1 and 2 that probably really is where they have, they question all that.
So yeah, sometimes.
Yeah.
Some of them don't. Some of them, some people come in and what you mentioned earlier about people being both willing to do the work and, more importantly, ready to make the change. Once they come in and they're ready to make the change, they can go through the process. And often, not everybody, and not even probably most people, but many people who come in for a stop smoking session leave and they're done. They walk out of my office or, hang up from the Zoom call, whichever. And, there's not another thought about it. And as I said, that's not most people, but it's many. I mean, a good chunk of them that do that. And some of them do need a little tune up day 2 or 3. And, others need tune-ups later. And some people go for 9 years and then, they get divorced or whatever, and they start again and, go back to that old coping mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But being ready to make the change and, kind of creating the space for the change to occur, I think that's a huge part of the process. Yeah. I've got a quote that popped earlier, and it's just popping back up again with regard to these emotions. I teach meditation as one of my little fun things to do, kind of my night job. And very many people, when they hear about it or they see it, or if I introduce myself as a meditation instructor, they're like, oh, I tried that one time. I got monkey mind. It's just running absolutely all over the place. And one of the things that I've found is the more people fight that, the more that they struggle with it, the more that monkey is fighting to get loose and run around and do all sorts of crazy things. And there's a Zen master, his name is Shunryu Suzuki. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And he's got a saying that thoughts will arise. Just open the front and back door of your heart and your mind and allow them to flow through your house. Just don't serve them tea. Which kind of ties back into what Danielle is, that, when we're balanced and when we're present and when we're embodying presence, these emotions that pop up are gone in 60 to 90 seconds or 2 minutes. They just don't last. They're there to get us alert. And, in the case of like a fight or flight type of a extreme example. And once they're gone, they're gone. And then the rest of it is just us going, okay, let me bring it back down again.
Well, that actually brings up Miriam's question. It says, she asked, what if the emotion coursing through the body seems too strong for a person to handle? There it is.
Yeah.
Anybody want to take a crack at that?
Well, I'll go back to my dog experience. I mean, that was a powerful emotion that was very dramatically coursing through my body. It was, in the moment, it was debilitating. As soon as I knew what day it was going to be, it was going to be the next day. And I was like done for the day. I couldn't work anymore. I just knew I wasn't going to be able to have a call. I wasn't going to be able to focus on anything other than that. And it came, and it was powerful. And that was big. I mean, it was like a torrent that was going through my house. That's my thoughts on it anyway. But I just didn't fight it. I just let it come and let it arise. And, I kind of just looked at it from the witnessing view of awake awareness and noticing that, man, this is, and it was a shock that it was so much more powerful and profound. You know, she's been dying for 18 months and getting progressively worse. So it was a slow, steady decline. And, you know, when the end came, it was pretty obvious. And right up to the day that I texted the vet and said, hey, I think it's time. Can you come? And she texted back and she said, I can be there tomorrow. And I was expecting her to say, I can be there next week. And I'm like, oh, okay, this is getting real. And then when it actually happened, I was like, it hit me like a ton of bricks. And I was, as much as I thought, and it played out in my mind that I've got this and I'm ready to rock and roll. Not even close. Mm-hmm. Not even close. I was ready for a big wave of emotion. I was not ready for a tsunami. Well, we are coming up to the top of the hour. So what I'd like to do before we close out is just spend a little bit of time telling folks about how they can get in contact with you. What are some of the things that you're working on right now? If you've got anything that is unique or interesting that people may have an interest, you know, please share that with the group. And since we've been going counterclockwise the whole time, Fred, if we could, I'd love to start with you.
Trying to figure out which way that is.
Well, it's you on my screen.
I said my name anyway. Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to be here. I love doing these, having these discussions. I just always love somehow how the directions they go always surprise and delight me. So I'm creating all kinds of new and interesting ways to work with clients and help them to have that experience of waking up a little bit more and more to who they really are. There are two phases in my work. One is this process of waking up, which isn't like a one-time kabam thing, at least not for most of us. It's more gradual. But we get to a point in that awakening process where we realize that, as I said earlier, that our happiness is intrinsic. It's not dependent on external circumstances. And that's the point in which we go to phase two, where I call that create your game, where now we can create any game in life that we want, knowing that our happiness is no longer dependent on the outcome. So traditionally, I've done that only as one-on-one coaching, but lately I've begun, I'm in the process right now of creating a group coaching experience where we're going to limit that to 8 people. There are still a couple of spots left in that. If there's somebody that would like to know more, you can reach out. There's my info down below. We can, I'm also building a membership group that will be available soon as well for people to explore that. Right now, I would invite you, if you're interested in anything that I've been sharing, at least today, that I have a free Facebook group called being.well. Got to put those dots in there, and there's no space between any of it. That's a free Facebook group where I do lives every week, and we get into some more of these ideas. So I'd love to have some of you guys join me there.
Beautiful. Danielle, how about you?
I love being on the posse and listening to you guys, and I love the conversations, the way they turn, and we all pretty much are just present for these Presence Posse conversations. And that I mentioned before, I have a 6-week course that's just starting in pursuing personal peace. I call that one Serene, and that's something you can find on my Facebook page. You can find it on my Facebook business page, which is also under my name. And that's the best way to get a hold of me right now, is just message me on Facebook. And I have another emotional mastery course coming up this fall that I'll be teaching for the second time. I just finished up teaching it for the first time, and it was a great transformational journey for the woman that I worked with in that. So I'm having fun, and I hope that you guys that are listening are having fun and are being exposed to new ideas and are drawn to someone to work with here on the posse. We appreciate you.
Yeah, I'm going to echo what you said there, Danielle. And an interesting part of this is I don't believe, unless maybe you and Malcolm, Fred, I don't believe any of us have ever met live before. We met each other in a kind of a mastermind group, and we recognized that we had so much in common. And one day, one of us, I don't even remember who it was, said, we ought to do a podcast. Probably was Malcolm, I'm guessing.
Or Miriam.
Or Miriam, yeah, could have been. And, we got together, and this is our 14th or 15th, and each and every one is so fun and so effortless. And, we come up with an idea and just basically start to have a conversation. And we love interacting with the folks. Thank you for Miriam and Jan for interacting with us. And we're live the same time, whatever time it is where you are right now, if you're watching, every single week. Professionally, I've got a couple of things like Fred. I am building out some ways that people can work with me on more of an entry level. Right now, my practice is pretty much 100% either working with individuals, or I do group coaching with corporations and organizations. If you're interested in diving in more, I do have a program called Spring into Mindfulness, and that is currently a 21-day journey. I'm still building it out. It's going to ultimately be a 30-day journey where each day I just deliver a little snippet, somewhere usually between 10 and 20 minutes, where we talk about some of these subjects, but in a bite-sized piece. Most days I give you a little something that you can experiment and play around with and take kind of the cafeteria approach. And, this didn't work that well for me, so I'm just going to leave that behind. But, oh, man, did I get some results there. I also have a free Facebook group. It's called OUR, Mindful Life. And just put that in the search engine and it'll take you right there. My website, Transformative Change, like a hypnotic trance, explains to you in pretty decent detail the work that I do. It's a 3-part process. The first is an intervention to take care of whatever may be blocking you and holding you back. And if you feel stuck, that's kind of where you would begin in the process. The second is transformation, and that's really what we've been talking about here today, making that shift in perspective to see that life doesn't happen to you, rather it flows through you. And the third is called transcendence. And the typical client that is in there is a peak performer, has set a lot of goals, like Steve Chandler's guys with the 5-year plan. If he had executed, which I'm guessing he probably didn't working with Steve, probably had a whole different plan that showed up for him. But had he gone through that step by step, thinking that once I climb to the top of this mountain, everything's going to be bluebirds and sunshine, and it's the skies are going to open up, it'll never rain again, and they get there, they climb those mountains, and they've been climbing mountains all of their lives, and they can just feel deep down inside that something still ain't right. I've got a hole in my heart. That's the perception and the conditioning. It's not the truth. And like as Fred said earlier, I help them to see their true nature, their authentic self, and make that shift. So for those of you who have been watching live, thank you very much for taking a little time out of your day to share with us. And I was going to announce what our topic is for next week, but honestly, I forgot to check.
It's right here. Miriam wrote it on the comments.
Oh, beautiful. I don't have my glasses on, so.
I will tell you. Oh, there, she just put it up for us. Next
Thank
week,
you.
Everybody's doing their best.
That came up, didn't it?
Including Bob.
Beautiful. Thank you, Miriam. And I'm sorry I'm not able to read the comments. I had so much glare coming out of my glasses, I had to take them off. So I'm operating blind. And thank you, Miriam, as well. Miriam Siegel has been our mistress of ceremonies, working behind the scenes, keeping this all together. so that we could be here with you and be 100% fully present and not have to worry about the tech. Miriam is a regular on our podcast. She's a psychotherapist out of Oslo, Norway. Miriam, if you've got your information, feel free to put it up, or otherwise they can just wait till the next time you're there. We go. There's Miriam's information. You want to read it, Fred?
Relation revolution.
Thank you, Danielle.
Yeah.
All right. So, guys, thanks again for tuning in and taking time out of your day. And we will see you guys next time. Bye-bye for now.